Carrying on with our written work, this is the final 4 measures of the Bach Prelude from the Well-Tempered Clavier, measures 33 through 36. Okay, we get it set up here. Before I go ahead though, I want to make a comment about what we're doing here. Many people feel as though, oh, I know that. No, unless you've done it several times, you don't know it. You may think you know it. But this is all brand new. I don't think anybody watching this has ever done this before in their entire life, or even if they have a PhD. I don't think they've ever done this. Nobody has. I worked on my PhD at the University of California. I didn't finish because I ran out of money, but I continued all my studies. But I never did this in all of my undergraduate and graduate work, master's degree. None of this was done because theory is, as a definition, is information or facts, shall we say, about somebody figuring out something and writing it up, but never from a piece of music. Nothing was related to a piece of music except as a possible small little example. And then a lot of them are just taken from the author's imagination, not imagination, but I mean what they wanted to express or what they wanted to show, so they wrote out some notes or whatever. But it was all theory. Had nothing to do with a Bach Prelude or a Chopin Nocturne or Debussy. Nothing. So this is brand new. And go through it, every single one of these videos, listen to every single second of every video, because sometimes at the very end I will put something that I feel is important to express. And if you don't listen to the whole video, you've missed some of it. And like one of my friends said, he's passed away, but he was a classical guitarist. And he said, you know, Ralph, I've never heard the things you're talking about expressed that way. We were just talking. Well, I don't think any of you have heard any of this expressed this way. So it's important to listen to everything. If you've gone through some video and only heard a portion of it because you thought you knew it all and heard it all, go back and review that video and listen to it to the very end. They're not that long. Okay, let's go ahead here. Now, where are we? We're at the brace. Treble clef. And the bass clef. Okay, and this is measure 33. Starts off with a C, then the right hand, an E, and a B flat, and whoops, that's far too low. It's got to be touching the note. And G. Okay. Again, I think this is rather basic, but this particular chord is explained in their theory text in such a different way. Number one, it's based upon C as the root, C, E, G, B flat. So you get 2 roots here. B flat is the C, E, G, B flat is the minor 7th. This is the 5th. And C to E is the major third as the uppermost note of that chord. Now this is a tonic chord. This is what confounds theorists, and they get so screwed up by it, and they have to label it in such a convoluted way that people don't like theory anymore. They hate it because it just doesn't mean too much. Well, this is one of the reasons. Okay, what's wrong with this? Well, the fact is that this is not a 5/7 chord. It's a 1 chord. It's a 1/7 chord. But a 1/7 chord is major, or a major 7th. This has got the minor 7th. So, way back in the middle of the last century, somewhere around 1950, one of America's great composers, I forget his name offhand, but he wrote a theory book. And as far as I can determine, he was one of the first people to describe this chord as a secondary dominant, because it's not based upon the 5th note of the scale. Again, and I've said this before, that functions must be separated from identities. Identity is sometimes expressed in theory courses or by other people by qualities, chord quality. I call it a chord identity. It's something that you can see, that you can hear, that you can understand. It has an identity when you listen to it or see it on paper. So I call it an identity. And this is the tonic because based upon the first note of the C major scale, it's also a dominant. Now there's 2 definitions of dominant, but there aren't excuse me, there aren't 2 definitions of the dominant. There's only one in relation to music, and that is the 5th note of the scale. So C, D, E, F, G is the 5th note of the scale, therefore that's dominant. Anything else isn't dominant, except for subdominant, which is 5 notes below the tonic. Okay, but that doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about now. So this composer, I wish I remembered his name, but anyway, I read his book, didn't think too much of it, as I do most theory books. He decided, oh, this is a 5/7 chord, but it, being a secondary dominant, it's called 5/7 of 5. Yeah, 5/7 of 4. Am I right there? 5/7 of 4, yes. 5/7 of 4. Because this dominant, if you call this a dominant, 5 leads to 1. Well, C then leads to F. So F has been then what they call, or he or whoever, called tonicized, made into a tonic. Your 4 chord, or your 4 function has been made into a tonic function temporarily, as they say, so that you can see that this is 5 of 4. Well, number 1, of course, is 5 of 4. But what happened to its function as a tonic? And what happened to its identifier? And 5/7 isn't an identifier, it's a function. Anytime you're talking about numbers, it's a function. And as soon as theorists get that separation, the better off we all will be. Of course, my feeling about theory manuals is you have my permission to dispose of them any way you see fit. Okay? This is a dominant, and that's the second definition of the word dominant. A chord identity made up of the characteristic intervals of a major 3rd and a minor 7th, which is a tritone. I get so disgusted. Major 3rd, minor 7th, that's a dominant. And that's all. There you have it. But you've got to create in your own minds that second definition of a dominant as being an identity, and you must have an identifier. And X has been used by several composers, maybe, theorists, I don't know. But it hasn't been accepted into the mainstream theory. And who knows why? Because they don't tell us why. Okay, the next chord, you keep the C in the bass. And the chord F, then you got a C, and then you got an A, and then you got an F. So F, A, C, F, A, F, F, A, C. This is the fifth, both of them. F is the root. F, the root, the major third, and the fifth. Now, C is no longer a root. C was the root of the C dominant here, or the tonic dominant, we can call it. Its F is now the root, and it's a 4 chord. Now we can see that the C dominant moves to the 4 chord, F major. But they don't have this as a function here because they're busy calling this a 5/7 of 4. Well, that's 5/7 of 4, but what's its function? Its function is as a tonic. They've left that out. Oops! Very conveniently left that out, the fact that this is a tonic chord. But it's a dominant on the tonic chord. It's a dominant identity with its identifier on the function, Roman numeral 1. Functions are always numbers. So when you talk 5/7 of 4, those are all functions. Nothing in there has anything to do with the identity, and there's no identifier. So it's major, and it's a 4 chord, and you keep the bass as a C. And let's continue on here. Okay. And the next chord, now then, on this 4 chord, we do have a D. You know, way down here. Remember at the very end, if you watch your notes, D. Well, I'm put a parenthesis around that because that becomes a 2. But then you'd have to relabel this as the minor 7th of the 2 chord. So it could be C, A, F, A, C, D, like the added 6th there. I don't know how you want to express that, but it's not really that important because you simply go down line until you get down to the D, and that finishes that particular measure. And you go on to keeping the C here. And in the right hand, you've got a G, B, D, F. And as far as the chord is concerned, it's a 5 chord with a C pedal. Well, you got C, 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 and you'll end with a C. So when you have all these regular C's, it's like the organist puts his foot down on C's and then plays the dominant here, he plays the major here, he plays the dominant chord over the pedal. This does create a harmony, even though we call it a pedal. But what would it be as calling this as a harmony or as an identity and as of itself? Forget the fact that it's a pedal. Well, C, you don't have an E, you have a G. So then from C, as a root, I'll put this all in parentheses, then you have the root, the 5th, the major 7th, the 9th, and the 11th. And that's not a bad sounding chord, letting C be the root. But that's not how it was intended back in the Baroque period. Now you might ask, did Bach label all these things this way? No, he didn't. He was German. He labeled it in German terms. How he labeled it or how he thought of it, I have no idea. All I can take from his music is what I understand of the language of music. And types of chords, major, dominant, half diminished, that sort of thing. That's all I can figure these things out with the English language. Maybe the French describe these in French terms. It's really not that important what language it is as far as the spoken language is concerned, but we're in the musical language. So we can either regard this C as a pedal point, and then you got a G dominant on top of it, but you have many different situations where you might have a dominant with a supertonic on top of it. Exactly the same thing. Then the supertonic starts the fifth note of the dominant. So G, B, D, D, F, A, C is the supertonic. And then it's from G, then that supertonic on D becomes the fifth, the major seventh, the ninth, and the 11th. So, it's just however you feel comfortable in labeling these things for yourself. But I want to point out the possibility of what it really is, because I think that we should take that chord in and of itself. What is it? What does it sound like? And this sounds like a dominant 7, 9, 11 chord. But I'm going by the old theory manuals or texts. Maybe I shouldn't. But what I should do is just explain the difference. Okay, so that takes care of that. And then guess what? We're on our last measure, which is simply a C. And you have the C, E, and G. Label them: root, the fifth, the major third, the root, and another doubling of the root down here. And it is major. There's no seventh about it. This is a dominant. This is a major. That's a dominant also. Okay. Get my hand out of the way for you a little bit here. And then major to finish it up with. And then we put in here the double bar, indicating that's the end. And then we can go ahead and do this, Xing this out. And that's it. We are done. Okay. Now, all of this that I presented for you here is totally useless. Has no use whatever. Because there it is on a piece of paper. Unless all of this material that I've presented to you here, let's open it up a little bit here on my camera. I can do that, I think. Yes. All this material that I've given you is on paper. And if that's where it is for you, it's useless. What you have to do is to take all this material that I've given you, all these 36 measures, and know them, and understand them, and then put them to use. And take your first chord in this piece, and play it, and label everything, and make sure that you hear it. Make sure that you hear that third. Major third is the uppermost note, and the root is the lowermost note. Those are important. The characteristic intervals. I'm saying this over and over and over, but the reason I'm saying it over and over and over is so that you will believe. Excuse me for that. But it's just, we're not doing this for a grade. I'm not going to give you a grade. This is one thing I don't like about school sometimes, is this grading system. The whole point is, to an education, is can you use it? So I've given you an education here, so to speak. Well, not so to speak, but I have. This is an education in the language of music with the vehicle as the Bach Prelude number 1 in C major from the Well-Tempered Clavier. Now, I'm going to give you one more type of analysis here, but not here, but in this series, which may be helpful, because then you don't need a treble and bass clef. You don't need any kind of staff lines. You simply put it on a piece of paper like a lead sheet. So we'll do that, but for right now, this completes all of the work on the manuscript paper. You've got to write out every single measure and label every single measure with Arabic numerals as to its major third, the fifth, the minor seventh, all that sort of thing, and see these notes as being a function within the chord, and then as a function within the scale. Now, also, when you're analyzing notes within a chord, you have to take the root of the note that you're analyzing. For example, in the key of that last chord, that C dominant chord, the minor seventh. Well, that has to be analyzed from the root C. Well, C to C is an octave, and down a step is the minor seventh. So there you have it. But let's say you're analyzing. Let's see. I'm on a wrong track here. You can go back to measure 29. What could be analyzed from its lower note? Well, okay. The F sharp on top of that measure 29, the uppermost note. What is it? Well, it's the major third, but certainly not the major third of what we got down that pedal note. It's the major third of D. And how did we get that? Because that's the missing root. So we have to find the roots in those particular situations. Going back that measure 29, by the way, let's pull this out like once more. And let's bring it up a little bit closer. There we go. Okay. Measure 29. Okay. Now, let's put this down so I don't think I'd bring that any closer. Oh, maybe we can. Fantastic. Okay. Now, what if we take this chord in and of itself without this being no, not that one. Excuse me. Measure 29 right here. Without this being a pedal point. Let's regard it as a true sound, in and of itself, without any other considerations. Well, I think we did as a supertonic, but we didn't. We had to find that root because of that tritone. So D is the root. Now, what is this? If we don't call that G a pedal, what do we call it? If D is the root, D, E, F sharp, G. I'm calling it F sharp because the key of D has an F sharp. It's the fourth. That's the 11th down there. So the lowermost note of this chord, if we don't have any other theory of it being a pedal, it's an 11th. So then this becomes a dominant on the supertonic, missing supertonic D, as an 11th. A D, F sharp, A, C, E flat minor 9, and the 11th. So what comes after the minor 9? The 11. So it could be a dominant minor 9, 11. with the 11th as the lowermost note. And I got something to share with you here. That's how the jazz musician views it. They don't use pedal points. That's old-fashioned. So I've learned something here. I've learned something that, number one, we have theory as to the usual designations of things like pedal points and so on. I think I'll get away from that. What is this sound? That's all I'm really interested in. What is the sound of a chord? As we found out, we do have minor ninths as the lowermost note of a chord. Go back and review your measure, the 4 bars from measure 21, where you have the minor ninth as the lowermost note of a chord. Yes, you have them. Then that minor 9 the next chord can be the root. But the minor 9 has to be regarded not as a suspended note possibly, but as part of the sound of the chord. And I think that's what we're really missing here when we talk about theory of music. It has nothing to do with the sound of these chords that any composer, Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, Debussy, Scriabin, and so on down the line, it sounds that anybody is really looking at and listening to. And listen to that chord without it being labeled as a pedal, but that's its usual designation. But all these chords with that lower note, sometimes it is part of the harmony, as they say. And then sometimes they say, oh, it isn't part of the harmony. Well, I'm sorry, but it is part of the harmony. Am I right? I'd like to know, really, I would like to know from you. Am I right? Are we really concerned with the sound of these chords, or are we concerned with the theory of them? Oh, the theory. Yeah, that's the correct designation. I say BS. Nonsense. We're looking at sounds. Well, that's my that's my sermon for today. Enjoy, and please let me know. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.